Well, I appreciate that. I actually, unlike usual where I just get up and go off memory, I actually worked really hard on this presentation, so I hope you enjoy it. Also, thankfully to the brother recording this and editing it, this should be one of the better presentations just visually because he's going to use my presentation. So you don't just get the picture of me sitting here talking the entire time, which I'm sure is very annoying to everyone. So right now, I'm giving a presentation on Rightism and ultra-leftism, the two faces of defeat and surrender. And I want to be clear about this. These are relatively difficult concepts, and I also wanted to include, to enrich our theoretical understanding of these concepts, but I also wanted to expand these because I also think that ultra-leftism and rightism they're the number one mistakes new organizers make. The problem isn't that they're not committed. The problem isn't that they don't want organization. The problem is they often make these sorts of errors, and these sorts of errors are incredibly detrimental to the movement. And so I obviously would like for us not to make them. But it's also a question of what is correct. And the question of what is correct is always the most difficult question, right? Because it's not obvious. We don't have the God Emperor of Dune, Marxist-Leninist, that can tell us, the right steps in each way. And so I kind of want to provide both the fundamental theoretical understandings, but then also to talk, there will be discussion questions. We'll break into groups, and there will be discussion questions for folks at home that they can ask themselves, or if they choose to watch it with someone, they can look at it. I will talk also about the historical examples of rightism and ultra-leftism, and then I'll go through some very common errors of rightism and ultra-leftism. Despite what some of the folks at home, namely Tampa, I will not be naming names, and I will not be naming organizations if there's any way, shape, and form that I can avoid it. But I will definitely name the economists and the Russian terrorists, since they've been dead for over 120 years, so I don't think I'm going to hurt their feelings. So let's talk about the orthodox view. So what is the orthodox view of and when I say orthodox, I want to be clear, orthodox Marxists. And what do we really mean by orthodox Marxists? It inevitably means Marxist-Leninists. So this is a very particular sort of view. If you find something useful for this and you're not Marxist-Leninist, then go with what's useful. If you are Marxist-Leninist, hopefully this will enrich the debate and discussion around it. But basically, the way it's characterized is there are right errors and there are left errors. Right errors being opportunism and left errors being ultra-leftism. It's a very jargony way of saying it. But what do we mean by left and right? So the ultra-left error is always being beyond the people. And this kind of makes sense. If I said, which I'm not, and would never advocate for saying, hey everybody, let's go grab some guns and start the revolution right now. It would be well beyond where the people are. It wouldn't make sense given our group, given our material conditions, and it would be disastrous. A good example of this would be the Days of Rage by the Weather Underground in Chicago. And what they said is like, we're gonna start this mother up right now, bring bats, bring clubs, bring shields, and we're gonna throw down with the cops. Well, they did, to their credit, do that. Unfortunately, they didn't actually gauge their support of the movement and the people in general. And so where they were expecting thousands upon thousands of people to show up, hundreds of people showed up. And for those of you who don't know, if you're going to throw down with the Chicago PD, you want more than a few hundred people. And it was disastrous. A bunch of people got their asses beat, a bunch of people got arrested, and the traditional understanding of ultra-left is, well, it was because they were too far beyond where the people were. So then what's a right error? Well, the right error is tailing the people. Again, a very jargonistic-y way of saying things, but basically it means being behind where the people are. It's unfortunate because we have a comrade in an organization that I might have a discussion with this, but you know, let's use Wisconsin because that's a much better example that won't step on too many toes. So what happened in Wisconsin, the first battle for Wisconsin, what happened was when Walker was making his attacks on workers, what did the unions do? What did the revolutionaries do? Not all of them, but what they did is instead they pushed for a recall, right? Now the people were ready for, you know, I mean, there's always a question of alternate histories. The people were militant. You know, they occupied the Capitol. They were ready for a general strike, or at least the strikes of the unions. And instead, what did the union leadership and the revolutionary leadership do? And let's not overstress the amount of revolutionary leadership. It was primarily union leadership. They said, no, 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 that's too militant. What we need to do is have a recall election and elect this Democrat that is an absolute bastard who's moderately better than, you know, Walker. How did that end? It ended in an absolute defeat for labor. Just crushing defeat. Nothing gained from it whatsoever. Walker won the recall election. The legislation passed, and now, unfortunately, they're fighting and have lost another battle against, you know, attacks on workers. Why? Because they were not willing to push to be where the workers were. Instead, what they did is they tailed them. People are pissed, but we can't push them too far, so let's just kind of, you know, go with the lowest common denominator politics. So this is rightism. Hold on, there we go. So what's the correct answer? Meet people where they're at. And I want to be really clear, I actually hate this phrase. But we are talking about the orthodox understanding of Marxism, so this is what's frequently said by Marxist-Leninists, is the correct application of the mass line and organization is to meet people where they're at. Why do you meet people where they're at? Well, you accurately judge conditions, you accurately judge capacity, and you accurately judge the militancy of the people in the struggle, and by meeting them where they're at, you can help develop and move the struggle forward. So what's the one of the problems, though, is, okay, so how do we figure that out? And we'll talk more about that in a second. But also, why is it that both ultra-left errors and rightist errors are always so disastrous? Let's see if I put a slide for this. Nope. The answer is because of spontaneity. This is one of the key theoretical concepts on left and right errors. So, what is spontaneity? What spontaneity is it's to just trust that things are going to work out. Well, Walker is so terrible. Of course people are going to elect a Democrat. How could they not, given how terrible Walker is? So what do? You depend on the bare spontaneity of political consciousness. You don't develop it. You don't plan for it. You just go, oh, well, you know, spontaneously people are going to decide that Walker is a shitbag, and so we're not going to vote for him. And so how could we lose, right? You know that every one of the union leadership, and it wasn't all, but every one of them who decided to support the recall election, in their head they thought, how could we possibly lose to Walker? And what happened? They lost because they depended on the spontaneity. We also can see it in the days of rage in Chicago. Well, when we do this action, people are going to realize that the cops are fucked up, the system's fucked up, and they're going to just flock to Chicago. And we're going to show that, you know, show the system and show the cops, and we're going to burn this mother down right now. Well, they depended on the spontaneity of the masses to arise, and what happened? They got their asses beat, both figuratively and literally. Rather than planning and building consciousness, again, the unity is in the spontaneity. So, as Lenin says in What Is to Be Done, although he uses different terminology, and we'll talk about that in the historical examples, both the ultra-left and the right opportunist errors have a unity in their unprincipled nature by depending on spontaneity. And I know we have some anarchist folks here. To be fair, the best anarchist folks I know. But what you'll notice is if you go around the anarchists who are not the best anarchist folks we know, you'll notice there's a large trust in spontaneity. There's a large trust that if we just black bloc it up, this 1,000-person protest will turn into a 1,000-person riot. And it's just not the case, right? Additionally, you'll notice the spontaneity of some communist parties in the United States of America who depend constantly on if we can just push the Democrats more to the left, then spontaneously we're going to awaken consciousness among the workers. And, you know, how's that working out for us, right? So I want to be clear, the root of both errors is spontaneity. And that's a theoretical point, but then also we need to have categories so we understand what's happening, and we can either A, understand where we made an error and correct it in the future, or B, identify it before we're getting the shit beat out of us by the Chicago cops, right? That seems worthwhile to me. So I'm gonna break you guys into groups. Let's see. How many folks we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll go 400 people here, I'd say. About 400 people. I heard a joke, and to be fair, I heard it from an RCP guy. How many RCP guys does it take to screw in a light bulb? 5. 1 to screw in the light bulb and 4 to pretend to be the masses. But again, the point is you've got to analyze conditions. You can't. Hey, this was from the 70s, and I'm not saying it's true now. I'm just saying that's a joke an old RCP guy told me. But again, we have to know what the conditions are. So let's break up into 4 groups. We'll do 2 minutes per question. I noticed that people are mostly sitting in their usual groups, so I'm going to actually do the count off for 4. And hopefully then people can meet with people who they don't always talk to. So we'll go with 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3. So if we can have the 1s over here, 2s over there, 3s over there, and 4s over there. We'll give it maybe 2 or 3 minutes per question. But all right, once people get settled.
Nice to meet you.
Awesome.
They do the like.
All right, so
now it's being put into practice. What we do then is make a summation. If this bill actually fixes the problem, then address it. If not, what's the summation moving forward? Right? So that's kind of
so if we can kind of bring it back together, just bring it back together a little. Just, I mean, you can stay where you're sitting because there's more questions, but if we could move on to the next section. No problem. The whole point of this is to be an interactive kind of presentation, so it's good that people are talking. So, also if you could cut my dialogue during the discussions, that would be great. Get myself in trouble there. So we run into some problems, right? We talked about ultra-leftism, we talked about rightism, and we talked about meeting people where they're at. So I'm going to tell you why I hate meeting people where they're at. It's because it's always used as a way to end the discussion. Well, you know, we can't have, a police brutality march that goes into the streets, because that's not where people are at. In Ferguson, the people who show up to help organize, mass demonstrations, that's not where people are at. It's always used to say, I'm right, you need to listen to me, and if you disagree, if the rightists always say, and you can think of a very large communist organization in the United States that calls every other group ultra-left. Why do they call every other group ultra-left? Well, because they're throwing in, actually there's multiple ones. It's because they always throw in with the Democrats. So the people who throw in with the Democrats call everybody else ultra-left because the limit of their politics is Democratic Party politics. The flip side is other groups call everyone rightist who actually organizes things. If you're not willing to jump on the table with a rifle in the cafeteria and say the revolution is coming right now, then you're a rightist. And you're just, a sellout social democrat. So what's the solution, right? This is a real practical problem, and since none of us are the god of communism or the god of revolution, we don't have an omnipotency where we can just determine it. So how do you solve it? Well, there's a couple steps. The main thing is collective discussion. Even if everyone doesn't agree, if you discuss things collectively, at least you know where the organization is. You at least know where other people are, and any given one individual can be wrong, but it's less likely for the collective to be wrong because there's the combined knowledge and experience of everyone in the room. So again, collective discussion. And in addition, when you have a collective decision based out of a collective discussion, if someone's like, this is ultra-left, this is ultra-left, this is ultra-left, and they're the minority, the absolute minority, and then the action happens and it's a disaster, then through the collective process you can go, you remember when I said this was ultra-left? You remember when it was a disaster for the reasons I said it was going to be a disaster? Now let's not do that again, And it's the collective is the very foundation for which you can avoid these problems. There's additional problems with collective discussion. So it's good, but it's not perfect. And in fact, I'm going to talk about some of the problems, but I want to de-emphasize those because even with the problems, there's a lot of benefits to it, far more benefits than what outweighs, the small drawbacks. In addition, after we're done with that, I also want to give an understanding of ultra-leftism and opportunism that will kind of help clarify stuff. Hopefully, we'll see. Additional problem with this practical discussion is who gets to decide for the collective. Now, this may not sound like a big problem, but frequently in collectives, there's people who have like a history in them. I mean, they hate when you do this, but if you go to any anarchist collective and you go, all right, so who's the leader? The answer you'll always get is, we don't have a leader. We are an anarchist, a fully democratic anarchist collective. And anyone can disagree with me if they have experience otherwise. But if you hang around them for a couple months, you'll know exactly who the leader or leaders are. And so that's part of the danger, is frequently there's institutionalized momentum among groups that can often result in either popularity contests, either the person just historically being the one in charge, and possibly for very good reasons. But then also it could be factions. One of the problems that we had is when we first started, it's not simply that it was more diverse, because actually I think we might be pretty close to as diverse as, give or take, when we started. But also there was a strong problem with factionalism. It's a joke, and it's not so jokey. You could always count on the anarcho-trots to vote against us. And there was a solid block that was like, we're against the Stalinists, and so it didn't matter if we were correct or incorrect, rightist, although we were very rarely rightist, or ultra-left. It was like, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. Well, that's the nature of group dynamics. But then we also have to say, okay, but then how do I win the conversation? And by win, I don't mean like I individually, I mean the collective comes to the correct decision. The way that we can get there is by analyzing opportunism and understanding its core role. Oh, this is part of the practical solutions. Obviously, collective discussion. For those of you who don't know, this was the large poster era of China, where when there were any problems, students and workers would post large posters stating what their problem was and what their opinions were. And so anyone could just walk down the street and see the collective wisdom of their school, their factory, their community. And so that's a good way to go. Let me double check my slides real quick here. Okay, yeah. So what is opportunism? Opportunism is an attempt to spontaneously gain control or short-term benefits by compromising principle. So there are two different ways to do this. The right opportunist way and the left opportunist way. So I'm going to keep using the Democrats because they're one of my favorite punching bags. You know, a lot of people say, well, the most important political thing we can do is fight the right. And I'll actually talk about that. And they think, well, the Democratic Party is the more progressive of the two parties, which is arguable at best. But they think, well, if I, as a communist, as an organizer, show up with the Democratic Party, then I'm going to run into other radical people, and then I can kind of win them slowly away. There's a small, tiny problem with this. There's a couple, but we'll start with the biggest. You're also supporting one of the two parties of imperialism. At that point, you have compromised yourself that it's not clear that you can even go on beyond that. Additionally, it's more likely that, it's less likely that you'll get short-term gains from Democratic Party diehards. I mean, notice all the Democrats that were against the wars when Bush was in office. And don't get me wrong, thankfully there's been some disillusionment with the Democratic Party, but the same Democratic hacks that were hacking against Bush are now hacking for Obama's wars, hacking for Libya, hacking for Afghanistan, the new war in Iraq, Syria, etc. So when you engage in right opportunism, it's less likely that you're going to win people to your politics, and your politics are going to be corrupted to become more and more rightist over the years. But then also there's the left opportunism. And I'm also gonna give another kind of discussion, because ultra-leftism is more difficult to understand, right? If someone, my view, and I think most of us here view, communist and anarchist and revolutionary politics are supposed to make people uncomfortable, right? If they didn't make people uncomfortable, it would just be supporting the status quo. It makes them uncomfortable when we stand against the wars and we say things like, no, not all soldiers are heroes. Or you could take my possibly ultra-left line, almost none of them are. Or, you know, it makes people uncomfortable when we say, no, if you're undocumented, you're not illegal and you have every right to be in this country. It makes them uncomfortable when we say there's a black and Chicano nation that demand independence. So it's very easy when people are uncomfortable to just name something ultra-left. I am not a big proponent of getting arrested through direct action, but sometimes that is the right thing to do. But again, you know, it would just be me name-calling if I just said ultra-left, ultra-left. So the right opportunism, everyone's kind of clear on that, and it's pretty self-evident. So this is the left opportunism, or ultra-leftism. And I'll quote my famous Chinese political activist, Mao Zedong. The essence of understanding ultra-leftism is left in form, right, opportunist in essence. And this comes from Bombard the Headquarter, which actually was during this very period. And the very first poster that Mao wrote, I believe, was Bombard the Headquarters, which is weird, right? Because he's the head of the Communist Party. Why would he be saying bombard the headquarters? Well, here's what he said. China's first Marxist-Leninist big character posters and the commentator's article on it in the People's Daily are indeed superbly written. Comrades, please read them again. But in the last 50 days or so, some leading comrades from the central down to the local levels have acted in a diametrically opposed way. Adopting the reactionary stand of the bourgeoisie, they have enforced a bourgeois dictatorship and struck down the surging movement of the great cultural revolution of the proletariat. They have stood facts on their heads and juggled black and white, encircled and suppressed revolutionaries, stifled opinions differing from their own, imposing a white terror, and felt very pleased with themselves. They have puffed up the arrogance of the bourgeoisie and deflated the morale of the proletariat. How poisonous! Viewed in connection with the right deviation of 1962 and the wrong tendency of 1964, which was, quote, left in form, but right in essence, shouldn't this make one awake? So this is the key. Left in form, right in essence. I'm going to get myself in trouble. That's okay, because I'm not going to name names. So there's a movement that's been spreading around the internet. It's called Maoism, Third Worldism. Is everyone vaguely familiar? So basically what they say is there is no proletariat in the first world, and only the revolution will come from the third world. And everyone in the United States is a bought-off America-can who's part of the United Snakes of America-ka. And it's gained a lot of traction, especially with social media and Facebook. And again, I'm purposefully not naming names because I don't think that that'll be helpful. But they seem the most left, right? They're talking about armed warfare, the global countryside will encircle the global cities, you know, revolution, you know, we need to become guerrilla fighters in the third world, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now that seems further left than any other group, any other position, or at least most. But there's a question that we have to ask. Well, what are you trying to really accomplish here? And if we ask, okay, you're left informed, but what's the essence of what you're saying? What the essence of what you're saying is stay home, be on your keyboard, write a bunch of articles, and argue with people on Facebook how there is no proletariat and all the left groups are terrible, and don't do anything. Because what is there for you to do? Because it's the first world. There are variations among this. But then what you'll notice is this is a very appealing idea. I think given the amount of work we all do, we would all love for our work to consist of staying home, writing on keyboards. I mean, wouldn't that be much better? So to identify the ultra-leftism, we have to find the opportunist kernel that, and there may not be one. So if you call something ultra-left and you can't identify its opportunism, it's probably because you just don't want to do it. And you may have good reasons, but we have to be clear about this. Another example is people who love getting arrested. There is a group of activists of all political stripes that love being arrested. You know, they love, you know, I'm going to sit in here until I'm arrested. Well, there may be a time for that. But what's the real ultra-leftism? It's an opportunism to say, look at me, I'm the most revolutionary person. I get arrested so much. How could anyone be more revolutionary than me? But then what's always ignored is the internal kernel of, well, where are you building organization? Where are you mobilizing the masses around you? You know, in the civil rights, you had hundreds and thousands of people getting mass arrested, you know, in these horrible conditions with like police dogs being, you know, sicked on them, fire hoses, etc. And it made the news, and it outraged the country, right? So you can see that there wasn't an opportunism there because they did all the hard organizing leading up to it. Whereas we frequently see people who want to get arrested. I mean, the term is going to jail with a smile on your face. And the reason why is because it's ultra-leftism. It's an opportunist way to prove to a select group of people, you somehow think that if you get arrested, people will flock to you. Again, some notable, it is, I agree, it's incredibly dumb. I would say if someone's constantly getting arrested, they're not doing it right, which is why the brother over there works so very hard to make sure people don't get arrested. at things, whereas we saw the consequences of people who do want people to get arrested, right? And it's the same thing. We had a rally, a bunch of people marched in front of it, marched people against traffic, almost got people hit by cars, almost got people arrested. Whereas when there's planned, organized actions, the people are generally safe, right? Okay, so this is sort of like the practical solution. 1 is collective discussion. 2 is understanding opportunism is usually the root of these 2 errors. And 3 is understanding that ultra-leftism is left in essence, but left in content and rightist in form because of that opportunism. So that being said, we'll go, we'll just start. How have you seen disagreements resolved? And then also you can, along with it, talk about what you think the best way to resolve them is. I'm going to just talk about all the questions as you finish up, go on to the next one, and we'll do this for another 5 minutes, so please.
When you think it's time to take action, they'll never be able to.
All right, if we can start bringing it back in. So I'm going to go through some historical examples of that Lenin kind of lays out in What Is to Be Done. And the first, so everyone knows that I'm union, I'm proud to be union, but also I don't think that's nearly sufficient. And I certainly don't think that it's enough. Even just to be in a union, you've got to be active and militant within the union. But to give a little bit of a background, so Russia obviously had a czar. The czar was a complete bastard. Basically didn't allow any political life, attempted to destroy unions, engaged in all sorts of shitty wars, starved massive amounts of people. And so there was a group of people in Lenin's time known as the economists. And basically what they said is, well, look, we're communists, right? And we're organizing the proletariat. So where are the proletariat? Well, they're workers. And where are workers? Well, they're in factories. And what's the most advanced section of these workers? Oh, the unionized workers. So they viewed unions as the only area of communist work. They refused to pursue anything else. They also liquidated the political struggle. And I want to give you the level of like liquidation of political struggle. Like they literally said, we don't even have to vote. I mean, not that voting is the great end-all be-all. In fact, it's like bare minimum, worst level political anything you can do. But they're like, no, we don't even need to vote. It doesn't matter who's elected because, you know, capitalism is going to collapse. And so we just need to be in trade unions and have the right moment to strike, you know? So part of their opportunism is these were the most advanced militant workers. And so they could recruit them to communism, right? Relative to the entire Russian Empire. Most of these workers were Russian, which is equivalent of saying in the United States, most of these workers were white. Again, they were already, most of them were already organized. And so if it's just somebody who's in a union and you say, hey, all you have to do is just be in a union and then say you're a communist, you know, it's very opportunistic and very easy, low-level struggle. It requires almost nothing. So, in addition, they refused to support other struggles and remained behind, using our original terms, all of them. If they ever took up a struggle, they only took it up in an opportunist way and tailed it in order to get the most they thought they could out of it. They never led the struggle. They never pushed the struggle. They were just like, well, this thing is happening, so let's go with it. And surprise, surprise, all this depended on the spontaneous self-destruction of capitalism rather than the planned struggle against it. And so ultimately, you can imagine how terribly effective this was, emphasis on the terrible. And basically, they died out, basically became Mensheviks, played very little, if any, role in the revolution. And when they did, it was only because they were like, oh, wait, we fucked up. Let's not do this anymore. But he also juxtaposed this with another group, which were the terrorists. And I want to be very specific. This was not general all-purpose terrorism. There was a specific group of anarchists. I want to say Nordov. I don't know. My Russian is atrocious. But in any case, there was an organized secret cell of anarchists. And, you know, they had roots in the Decembrists who actually managed to blow up a czar. So it's not like they were completely ineffectual in like their terrorism. And their idea was, and I'm not against blowing up czars. Historical fact of the matter. Their main effort was propaganda of the deed. And this is an anarchist concept, which is if we just show people what's possible, then they'll start doing it. If we kill the czar, they'll realize we can kill any of the czar's men, we can kill any of the czar's soldiers, or any in the royal family, and they'll realize that the state is a lie, and that they can just, you know, the masses will spontaneously rise up. Needless to say, this did not pan out too well. And you can kind of see the opportunism here. The first, again, is, as always, is they refuse to do any organizing, right? As much planning and organization goes into a secret cell of people who make bombs and throw bombs, once you handle the bombs, that's pretty much all the organizing you have to do. And they didn't make any deep connections with the people. And how could they? They were a clandestine terrorist organization. Generally, you don't leave your, you know, calling card to have people organize with you. And they also had an additional opportunism. They attempted to become, or their terrorism was a play to become the most revolutionary group. There were a lot of different groups doing a lot of different things in Russia. And so they wanted to say, look at us, we're the most revolutionary. Who else is willing to, you know, throw your life away? And they probably wouldn't say, they would say sacrifice, I'd say throw your life away. To blow up, you know, a czarist official. Well, okay, maybe that has the highest cost, but it doesn't have the highest benefit. And so they managed to recruit primarily idealistic young male students to be part of this, but then ultimately it totally collapsed. But the flip side is also, you'll notice, it depends on the spontaneous collapse of capitalism, just as the economists did. So one who was like, everything is political, we need to, you know, take up every struggle, you know, assassinate people, shoot people, blow things up. And then the other that's not even like, we need to vote for the Democrats, but like, I'm in a union, good enough. Both depended on spontaneity, both depended on opportunism, both were horrible disasters. So this is kind of good historically, but then let's talk about, I'm guessing we don't have too many problems with Russian czars at this point. So let's talk about some errors that are more common. And this is, if you're new to organizing, I want to be very precise about these errors. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. And part of it is also dependent on what the situation is. So what may be an error in one situation is not an error in another situation. And you just have to analyze it and make sense of it. So I have this wonderful picture, historical, of the Communist Party USA in the 50s. And what it says is, communism is an Americanism of the 20th century. I think most people in this room would agree that communism is not the Americanism of any century, and in fact is the struggle against Americanism. But you can see this sort of rightist error where they're like, no guys, really, we're just super patriotic Americans like you. Doesn't that make you want to be communist? Another thing they would say is communism is Americanism plus. But I think you can kind of understand, given this, why they are the picture of rightism I'm using. So the three things, and some are related. The first and most common error we see is left unity. And it is a rightist error. And you see it by people who just barely start organizing. And it goes something like this. Well, if we all just get together and we all just work together, you know, then we can make a real change. Now, here's the thing about that. we're already separate from each other. You can do your thing, I can do my thing. If your thing starts making sense, I'll go do that. And if my thing makes sense, then come help me do that. But what it is it's a rightist, opportunist. First off, it really, when people call for left unity, what they really mean is shut the fuck up, do what I tell you, listen to my leadership. I know some of you have historical experiences, but if you think, or personal experiences, can anyone in this room have an experience where someone who calls for unity, we all need to be united, solidarity, that's another good one. We need to have solidarity with each other. See, here's the thing is you think it's what I did there, but I've been hearing it for 8 years. It's not just like a one-time thing, but have people heard other people?
I see what you're getting at. You have to talk to each other, that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, and so what it is it's opportunism. And so that's the first rightist error that almost everybody new to organizing makes. I also made it. So I want to be clear, I'm not like criticizing like, you kids. Actually, I made that error for much longer than I should have. And it was a disaster. So the next rightist error is don't divide the class. You know, we all are working class. You know, we are all workers. And thankfully, we don't have that person around anymore. But all the time, it's like, yeah, also there's an oppressed nation. And it's like, yeah, but you know, you don't want to divide the country because, you know, workers in California are just like workers in Boston. Why do you have to divide people with sex and gender and, you know, these sorts of things? You know, why can't we all just, you know, recognize that we're all human, we're all workers, we're all in the same struggle. And this rightist error is an attempt to avoid disagreement. And the idea is if we can squash all of our differences, then somehow we'll be more united. Here's the problem with it. And this is, again, the opportunism of it is like, oh, well, you know, and it gets more specific. Like often, you know, like if a white guy, thankfully this doesn't happen around us anymore. If a white guy said something that was like kind of racist or sexist at a protest, people would, like if you raised it with them, people afterwards would take you aside and be like, hey, you know, we're all just united in this struggle and you shouldn't be dividing people. You're just going to alienate people. And it's really horrifying. But the core of this is you can't divide what's already divided. You can't, it doesn't divide the working class to recognize their nations. It doesn't divide the working class to recognize their different sexual orientations, gender, etc., because that already exists. And so there's this opportunism that wants to quiet it rather than, okay, we do have these differences. How do we move forward with these differences? Yes, please.
I choose to do it in a way that validates each group, each nation, each so on and so on, versus doing it in a way that's counterproductive. It says we're us and they're them.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It is important to recognize these differences, but unity, right? Even the term unity only arises out of differences, right? You can't unify something that's already whole, right? And so we have to understand that unity comes from, just like left unity is unprincipled, right? And is rightism, this sort of worker unity is also unprincipled. And then part of it is, and this is one of the best ways to avoid sectarianism, which I'll actually talk about. If we can't work together, we should work separately, right? And that's, I think, a much better line and a more principled line than left unity. And then here's the third very common one: defeat the ultra-right. And this happens every time an election comes around. Well, you have to support the Democrats. You have to knock doors for the Democrats. Because don't you know that the Republicans are like fascists? Well, okay, maybe so, but it's not clear that that's the way to do it. You know, my view is, right, change comes in the streets, not in the ballot box. So then I'm frequently asked to give up a principled position to defeat the so-called ultra-right. And we also see this in every other struggle. We have to support this shitty immigration bill because don't you know that the Republicans will come up with an Arizona law, right? And it's a way to dampen struggle and attempt to win people over with, revolution light. Oh, you don't like revolution? Well, have some revolution light. Again, you can see the core of the opportunism here. Ultra-leftism. So the first is left sectarianism. Well, your group did something. Our group had a split in the 1960s over the issue of Cambodia, so fuck you, I'm never working with you again. And if you spend any time online, you see this everywhere, all the time. And it's not just, like Marxists who do it. It's like, well, fuck you, I'm an anarcho-primitivist. Well, fuck you, I'm a anarcho-syndicalist. And it's important, again, to recognize these differences. I'm not saying we shouldn't recognize there are political differences, but also to make it the point of every discussion. Its opportunism is based on an ideological purity. If I can score the most number of points online, then this person will join my organization. And, again, it avoids people doing work. And there is an organization that's Trotskyist that this is basically their view. And so people, it takes nothing except agreement to join with them. And then they also, leave. And so that's what they do, is they just have an endless mill of people who say they're paying dues, pay some dues, leave in 2 months, And so, again, the opportunism just doesn't work. The next one, which I'm sure is going to be a big hit on YouTube, is black bloc or quote-unquote revolutionary actions. There is a time to fight the cops. In Europe, makes a lot of sense. In Greece, makes a lot of sense to fight the cops. In South Korea, makes a lot of sense when they have massive protests/riots because they live essentially under a dictatorship. But to just use an example, when I was at the NATO protest in 2012, there was 14,000 people there, and there was a black bloc of maybe 100 people. And so what did they do? They ran and tried to push their way through the crowd, tried to push their way to the front. They literally knocked over old ladies and trampled on children. Why? Because if that black bloc isn't if everyone sees that black bloc is at the front of the protest, suddenly, even though they didn't do any work organizing it, suddenly it's their protest, right? You can see the opportunism there. It is a dick move. Yes, that's exactly correct. And you'll notice, communists are not, at least in this period, prone to sort of black bloc actions. They were definitely in the 60s. But also there's this attitude of oh, we're more revolutionary than you because of X. And the idea is, if I can just show people I'm more revolutionary, then they'll know that they need to join with me and do what I tell them. Whereas it's, again, completely unprincipled. And this one does require a little more explanation. Just as there's the rightist, don't divide the class. Oh, actually, sorry. Here's the ultra-leftism.
This is such an awkward photo.
Yeah, isn't it? Don't you feel embarrassed for the person? And you're like, that's not what we're doing here, guy.
Was that a hockey riot?
I think it was a hockey riot in Vancouver.
Oh my god. That's so stupid.
White people in their school.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All the hockey people inside.
So,
Why don't they just obey the law?
well, yeah. So just as the rightists will always say things like, you can't divide the class, we need to recognize we're all human or we're all workers. The flip side is we have to recognize every single difference. A good example, I and another brother faced a huge amount of criticism for inviting Rocky Anderson to speak at a police brutality. And we were attacked, quote unquote, from the left over this action. Why? Because Rocky is a rich, white, cisgendered, heterosexual man, right? If you go down all the list of things that you can list that are bad, he is all of them. And they attacked us for this. One thing that they didn't even bother researching. At one point I asked one of the people, so can you explain to me why it was bad to invite Rocky Anderson? And they said, well, you are silencing other voices that could have occupied that space. I said, well, couldn't there be a reason to invite Rocky Anderson? And they're like, there would never be any reason to invite Rocky Anderson to speak at a police brutality event because that is about black and brown voices, not about rich, white, cisgendered men. So, man, they're more sensitive and more revolutionary than me. Except what they didn't know is that Rocky Anderson had prosecuted more cases of police brutality and misconduct than anyone else ever in the history of this state. Had argued in front of the Supreme Court to win rights for prisoners, was the head of the ACLU. And so what you'll notice, and this is a very common trend, what should be an important conversation about respecting differences, recognizing privilege, etc., becomes a tool to club people and say, shut the fuck up and do what I tell you. And that's where we have to, again, it sounds weird, meet people where they're at. We have to decide if we are glossing over serious differences, especially differences of power among white men, rich or middle class, educated, etc., and whether or not this is, as an ultra-left error, being used opportunistically to try and appear better than other people and to silence real political discussion. So that being said, I'll take a few hands. It is getting late. Was Occupy Wall Street ultra-left? What do you guys think? Was it rightist, ultra-left? Was it exactly right? Right? There's a whole big discussion we have, and then suddenly you're confronted with a real-world example. Okay, one person says rightist. What makes you say that?
Rightist is the one that tries to conglomerate everyone into one big blob, and then they just say, we have tons of people, right? That's the one. So that was Occupy. They didn't have any, like, they were against the banks, but like there was no organization to do anything about the banks. There was nobody who came to the banks and said, hey, we want this. You know, it was just a lot of people camping out. And then a lot of people having to deal with the camp outs, and it just crushed it. So. Okay, so
for those of you at home, the comrades said that it was rightist because ultimately it just tried to form a unity, an unprincipled unity of everyone there. It didn't depend on organization and ultimately collapsed under its own weight. Does everyone agree with that?
Wasn't there argument amongst the people as to in Occupy Wall Street as to what political path the organization itself should take? So in function, it was more kind of an argument over the Ubermensch of revolution of revolution, and it was obviously rightist in function.
So this is an additional thing. He said, wasn't there a discussion about the direction of the movement to take? And that's very true. I mean, a lot of Occupy was discussion. Yes?
My superficial view off the top of my head is this. It was actually just the masses of people. The various revolutionary groups and how they responded to them, or what I think should be analyzed is either right or left. The group itself tried to make political decisions by doing direct democracy and those sorts of things. But for the most part, I don't think they had a political tendency or organization. It was just spontaneity.
And I think that's great. I actually kind of agree with that. And I kind of wanted to kind of throw it out there as like not a trick question. So what the comrade said is, it's not that Occupy was ultra-left or rightist in character. It was a spontaneous uprising of the masses of people. And the real question was, how did folks respond to it? And I think that's correct. I mean, obviously there were cases where people got, thousands of people got arrested. There was, direct action, et cetera, but it's not necessarily ultra-left. And yes, admittedly, it was an attempt to find unity. But if there was a problem with that, it was that it was unprincipled in its character. And that's different from place to place. There are still Occupies. Occupy Savannah is still going, whereas ours is not because of ultra-left and rightist errors, interestingly enough. So I think that's a good point. And I also think, so I just gave you this big model, right? This big, complicated model. But then also, we have to not get lost in the minutia. Millions of people around the country rose up against the banks and the banking system. Even if we don't agree with all of it, and God knows I didn't, and I was at the camp, we have to recognize the power of the people rising, which actually makes this one a lot less difficult. Oh, yes, please.
I was also going to say that we were saying, is it ultra-light, was it ultra-right or ultra-left? I think that there were some points where Occupy was right in the sweet spot that you were discussing. The Oakland port action, when we shut the port down, was like the perfect combination of understanding what the forces were, making some sort of symbolic statement, but actually going there and shutting something down for a shift or two, but it was still a fairly significant thing. And that's, so it's even more what Chris was saying, like it was that and also in the middle.
Yeah, and so what the comrade said is, at times Occupy was rightist, at times Occupy was ultra-left, but there were like sweet spots like the shutdown of the Oakland port that were very good. And I think that's an excellent concrete point, and I appreciate you bringing it up. So Ferguson, rightist, ultra-leftist, none of the above?
A little bit of both.
We'll go with.
I'd say it's closer to the middle than Occupy was. I think there's I don't know what the timeline is. There's nothing as spectacular as like a camp or whatever, but there's been protests in Ferguson like since the very day of the events that caused all this. So that's significant. I think the demands are more concrete, and I think the organization is stronger than Occupy. So whatever we think about Occupy Ferguson is like an improvement. And I think a lot of the people were involved in similar things. So they're very,
So what the comrade said is Ferguson is even more correct and has better organization, better quality actions, et cetera, et cetera. You had a...
I don't think it's not a range more correct. I think it's excuse me, right where it's ought to be. And I think it's kind of interesting because within our particular group, when we're discussing things, errors that were ultra-left, I think there would be a lot of similarities, but we're looking at meeting people where they are. Ferguson as a community, I think they did exactly that. Like the entire community came out together and they were in complete agreement. So I think it was pretty
Yeah, so what the comrade said is, if we're talking about meeting people where they're at, this is where the community wanted to be. And in fact, this is spot on. Sorry.
I would just say I follow Twitter a ton on this instance and then the instance of the Chapel Hill shooting. The level of consciousness that was spread around those areas, it's kind of hard to say, point out it as a thing, but regardless, the flow of information seemed to be always spot on. There was never like, oh, I guess we gotta, try to get Obama a third term. Or, there's actually been a lot of criticism raised of people like Al Sharpton for trying to co-opt their movement, which makes sense. Same time, lighting cop cars on fire, the decision of Mike Brown might seem a bit ultra-left, but at the same time,
so
defending itself.
the point the comrade made is that he follows Twitter quite a bit, and the quality of information wasn't much higher, and the political line was much higher. If we're talking about opportunists, he raised that Al Sharpton was actually not particularly welcome in Ferguson, and in fact they rejected the traditional rightist line that often happens with these, which is to support the Democrats. So I'll actually weigh in. I actually think this is one of the perfect examples of not just meeting people where they're at, but advancing the struggle. Because our point is not, and I guess I should have qualified this, it's not just to meet people where they're at and stick there. It's to meet people where they're at. And again, I hate that phrase. I think it needs to be understood in a very, very precise way. But heighten and intensify the struggles. And I think Ferguson is a great example of that. Some criticized the people in Ferguson for being ultra-left, for fighting the cops and, you know, lighting cop cars on fire and whatever. I 100% disagree. I think that, just as the comrade said, when a nation is defending itself, sometimes this is the exact course of action. Now, the reason why I ended with this is because the tools that I've presented, if you decide to use them, they tend towards rightism. They tend towards meeting people where they're at, and usually meeting people where they're at is the lowest common denominator. Or people think about that. I don't think it's correct. So I'm reaffirming the traditional orthodox Marxist view of things, but I'm also saying we have to remember that we are revolutionaries, and we are here not to dampen the revolutionary masses, but to incite them, to move them forward, to make them stronger and angrier and more organized. Actually, I think that's it. Are there any questions? Oh. Question? Okay, please.
I was wondering, when you were talking about Ferguson, you were saying that it was like, you know, the perfect example of being like finding the correct ground and inciting the masses to more. And I was wondering what organization. I mean, because I was thinking it was kind of like what Chris had said. It was like a spontaneous uprising of the masses, and I was wondering what was the organization that pushed them to a higher level of consciousness and activity. And then I'm also wondering, I'm wondering about the guy in the picture. He's wearing, the guy at the front, he's wearing, I think he's called a keffiyeh?
A keffiyeh, yes.
I think it's like associated with like a Palestinian struggle.
Yes, the keffiyeh is associated with the Palestinian struggle.
Like, were a lot of the organizers there like, you know, revolutionary communists of some sort?
So a lot of it was actually community organizing and was actually based in mass organization. As far as who's behind it, most things actually have some nefarious communist organization behind it pulling the strings. In this case, I don't think that was the case. I know for a fact multiple organizations sent multiple people. Some were from the local area, others traveled nationally. And yeah, so I don't think that it certainly wasn't sparked by revolutionary communists. But then different revolutionary communist groups did orient in different ways. Some groups came and joined with the mass organizations and helped with logistics and stuff like that. Others came and did reporting and interviewed people. And then one unfortunate group that will remain unnamed tried to get in front of every protest with their banner with their party's name on it. So there's all different kinds of orientations that people had towards Ferguson. You know, part of it is capacity. You know, some people just pushed like, you need to join our communist organization because we'll heighten the struggle in Ferguson, but then didn't do anything on the ground. That would be a form of rightism and opportunism. And in fact, a lot of groups rushed there to do just that. Obviously trying to push your way to the front of a march you didn't organize, obviously ultra left. But some people and, you know, various people, various groups actually did kind of merge and help with the mass organizing. So that would be probably a more correct orientation. Yes?
One of the things I want to mention just as a response is also with your sort of orthodox view is you have to have faith in the masses. And in this case, yeah, there's spontaneous things that just happen. Nobody read a giant book about Ferguson and then read a giant book about Palestine and were like, we need to push this line. People just recognize, getting tear gas Palestinians last summer and then see the same thing happening in their own city in front of their own eyes. And they just draw the natural conclusion that, yeah, we're an oppressed nation like the Palestinians, and we should think about our struggles and how they're same and different. Again, the level of consciousness of this movement doesn't require some sort of revolutionary figurehead handing out, any type of guidance. It's just there. These people understand what white supremacy is. They understand what it's done to them. They can look at world events and say, that's another example of the oppression of black people by white supremacy.
Yeah, so kind of for the people at home, there was a lot there, but I'll kind of organize what the comrade said in just as directly as I can. Part of the Orthodox view requires having faith in the masses. And so there is a level of spontaneity in the masses, but also that doesn't, you trust in the masses, not in the spontaneity. The flip side is they also don't need someone out there handing out collected works of Lenin or quotations of Chairman Mao in order to understand that they're being oppressed and to rise up. And there was a specific question about the kafaya it's not that, it doesn't take a political pamphlet for people who are like, Palestinians were getting tear gassed, we're getting tear gassed, there's a connection in our struggle as an oppressed nation. And that's, you already heard that, but that's kind of for the people at home. Was there another hand? Okay.
Just possibly quick. So you mentioned spontaneity is sort of also the enemy in this case. It's not like people read the book on how to be a rightist or how to be ultra-leftist. It's sort of just a natural inclination that people who are very new to organizing go for. I mean, do you see that as correct, or is it? Yeah,
so the question is, if spontaneity is the enemy, it's not that people read up on spontaneity and decide to be leftist or ultra-left or right. It's just that they have an inclination, and when they're new to organizing, they often kind of go with their gut. That's again why I mentioned this in the beginning, why I wanted to put this presentation together and actually do a good job of it. I think that it would be helpful for people who are new to organizing. Some of you in this room are new to it. Some of you have been doing it forever. But I thought it would be helpful for people so that when they analyze their new situation, when you come off your first protest and there's 500 people and you go, what is to be done? There's always a danger of either going rightist or ultra-left, and instead the key is to think about it and kind of move forward in the best possible way. So thank you for bringing that up. All right, well, if there's nothing else, I'd like to thank you all for spending your evening here, and have a good night.